Jo Martin is back as the Fugitive Doctor for a new and exciting spin-off of audio dramas with Big Finish. As in today's Big Finish audio drama review, I'm going to be taking a look at Volume 1 of the Fugitive Doctor adventures entitled Most Wanted. This box set, even though we're only in February of 2025, is probably going to be one of the biggest box sets of this year. It has had quite a lot of excitement behind it for quite understandable reasons. It is the first time, other than once in future, that Big Finish have ventured into the 13th Doctor era. In fact, this box set has already sold out on physical CD. It was a limited edition to, I do believe, 1,000 CDs. So I'm guessing the popularity will also continue into the second volume coming later this year as well, but do not fear, the digital download will always be available to purchase from the Big Finish website. To start off with, the cover art for this one is rather cinematic and grand as created by Simon Holub. Very cool. Love the use of colour with Jo Martin in the centre. So without further ado, let's take a look at the episodes themselves. It feels so unusual hearing the 13th Doctor era theme tune on a Big Finish audio drama. It marks the beginning of a brand new chapter for audio drama in 2025. We're seeing the likes of Sacha Dhawan's Master, Jodie herself alongside Yaz, of course, Mandip Gill, and currently within this box set, Jo Martin as the Fugitive Doctor. As well as script editing the series, Robert Valentine pens the opening story being Fast Times, and I think it very much sells the personality traits of this era. We have a Doctor on the run from her own people, especially the character of Cosmogon, but she doesn't really know why. Her identity is warped, her past is foggy, and I think because of that there is also an element of irritableness to her Doctor, some frustration, and she then takes that out on others. I know that a few people have, I suppose quite rightfully said, why does the Fugitive Doctor not have her own theme tune? Which I can certainly see the argument of that, but currently, in the time that we're living in, I think that the Fugitive Doctor, for the time being, is always going to be a little bit linked to 13. It's weird, it's like two Doctors within the space of one era, but I would love for her to get her own theme tune at some point. Now, I think it's only really fair for me to say, really, that I'm not perhaps the target audience for this box set. I have a very odd relationship with the 2018 to 2022 era of the show because I desperately wanted to connect with it. It ran for the entirety of my university journey, so as Doctor Who itself ventured into a new chapter, I was as well. I watched it alongside my flatmates. There was a very different personal era attached to that specific period of the show, and yet I felt like I could never fully bond with this era when it was on screen. But as an avid fan of the 6th Doctor, who was being given a brand new lease of life with audio, I do feel like I owe it to this era of the show, because I know the frustrations of seeing a character's potential and yet them falling short on screen. So I was excited for this set to see what they were going to do. As the title suggests, Fast Times is a very fast-paced, energetic story. There is a bounty on the Doctor, which means that she finds herself constantly on the run. We visit a space prison called Punishment, and we have a few shabby alien worlds thrown in there as well for good measure. Having the Fugitive Doctor as an inmate within the early scenes of the story within the prison is quite a fun idea, putting the inmates in their place. This is a Doctor who will not be messed around, and along the way she meets the character of Fade alongside her teddy bear friend. This makes for a rather different Doctor-companion relationship, one which lacks the obvious closeness. I think the writing gives Leah Harvey a number of nice scenes to work with throughout the story. She's very motivated, and I like the little glimpses into her backstory. I certainly cared for her journey within this episode, and she also gave Jo Martin a great performance to bounce off and interact with. It's interesting too hearing the Fugitive Doctor almost bat away the more caring characteristics that you'd usually present within a Doctor-companion relationship. She's there to help when needed, but again this feels like a Doctor battling with her own identity, not wanting to get too directly involved, but still wanting to help and save people, but she's overwhelmed by her own big problems. So when she leaves Fade to do her own thing, I think she's somewhat frustrated by that as well. As I mentioned with Jo Martin's appearance within the 60th anniversary celebrations once and future at Big Finish, I am presently surprised by how well Jo Martin carries her Doctor's presence on audio. She is a very hands-on Doctor, very visual. She never seems to keep still, especially as she embarks upon a chase-style sequence within the later part of this episode. Sometimes an actor can just read the lines as if it's an audiobook, but Jo's performance creates that lovely sense of movement. As a listener, I can imagine her thrashing around the TARDIS console. It's also quite exciting hearing her interact with the Daleks in this story, although they don't really do too much for the episode overall, quite literally just chasing the TARDIS throughout time. I think they actually have one scene together where they're in the same location, so perhaps this is done solely from a marketing perspective rather than a storytelling perspective. It's a very simple sci-fi adventure, complete with the occasional bit of technobabble and universe building thrown in there as well, but I wouldn't say it's anything groundbreaking. It's an easy listen to get the box set started. It's basically a more modern, fast-paced take on the chase from the first Doctor era, but when in the later half you have some very visual scenes hopping from location to location to sort of prove the Doctor's point, I think that can sometimes be rather difficult to pull off on audio. But one thing is certain from this story, I'm already sold on Jo Martin's performance. She's got the ball rolling incredibly quickly. She works so well within this format. Episode 2, The Legend of Baba Yaga, as written by Roshana Patel. Now this is a really, really impressive story. Roshana is absolutely a name to look out for with Big Finish. Her story Manhunt within the War Master Volume 10 Rogue Encounters, and the Bernie Summerfield and David Warner Doctor Adventures Volume 7 of that series were incredibly impressive. And funnily enough, Manhunt, much like The Legend of Baba Yaga, had a slightly extended runtime of over 1 hour. I think that this benefited the plot all the more for it. It provides time to fully flesh out this story's concept. We're in 17th century Russia, we meet Vasilisa and her stepmother and sister, and their flame within their house has been knocked over, and things are incredibly cold. After all, it's winter, and the weather isn't great. So they task Vasilisa to venture to their witchy, mysterious neighbour, Baba Yaga, to ask for a new flame. It's clear that Vasilisa isn't really liked at all by her family, and I love the journey that we go on with the character throughout this episode. I do feel really sorry for her. She's only a kid, and yet she's trapped so awfully. I think the concept of this story on paper feels like it really shouldn't work. I think if I knew more about this story going in, I wouldn't have gone in with high hopes. Because upon meeting the Fugitive Doctor, I never thought that having a story where she's essentially inheriting a child as a companion would bring out this particular incarnation's strengths, but it absolutely does. I think this is because that New Who has a habit of making children incredibly annoying. This story doesn't do that. Both of the characters learn from one another as they embark upon their quest, and I really appreciate how this story deals with the supernatural and the otherworldly. The Doctor recognises the concept of the Baba Yaga from stories passed down through Slavic folklore, so this whole story has a wonderful energy about it. As a listener, I felt like I was dancing on that line of the unknown, tampering in something quite dangerous and magical, which I think is a rare thing for Doctor Who. I like when Doctor Who does this rather than focusing solely on sci-fi, and it does feel really refreshing given the heavy sci-fi elements within the previous episode. Whilst the Fugitive Doctor is still on the run from Cosmogon, wanting to restore her memories, the way Roshana incorporates this indirectly into the plot of this story is beautifully poetic. Vasilisa hates home, she feels like she no longer belongs, much like the Doctor. There's a really lovely scene within the TARDIS in this story that is probably the highlight for the Fugitive Doctor on audio to date. Likewise, there is also some interesting parallels between the Doctor and the character of Baba Yaga, both of which are these very distant, mysterious characters. So I did really appreciate these parallels. It really added something to the story. It allows for us to grow more familiar to this particular incarnation of the Doctor, whilst doing so cleverly through fresh, new, exciting story ideas. This episode did make the Fugitive Doctor's portrayal feel a little bit different to the previous story, a little bit more warm, but even then she leaves Vasilisa to do a little bit of the legwork, as the Doctor wants to handle her own problems. So even though she's a kid, she's still getting her hands dirty within this story, and the Doctor doesn't seem to care as much. I think other doctors would wrap the child in cotton wool, but she's letting her do her own thing, which I quite like. This story really sold to me the potential for the Fugitive Doctor on audio. Seeing her interact with a child means that she is less harsh, less snappy, but there is still that element of detachment and distance, as within the previous story. This is a Doctor who does still care, but she has her own motivations that she wishes to see through. Jacqueline King, of course, we all know her as Sylvia Noble. She is also within this story as Baba Yaga, and she does a brilliant job. Such a grim fairy tale performance. The joys of Big Finish is that you can use your imagination to visualise the locations and the Baba Yaga themselves in this episode, and there are some gruesome dark moments, but it's up to you as a listener to determine how grim you wish for this story to be. The ending of this episode I also found really satisfying. I loved how it tied together all of the threads into a comprehensible yet also bizarre, magical conclusion, and as as the ending theme played, I knew this was a story that I really enjoyed experiencing. I'm always glad when episodes like this occur with a new Who Doctor, because I think it shows off the potential for Big Finish and the different types of storytelling that can be done on audio. It's a very visual, imaginative story. I was there in the locations of the episode, so I just really enjoyed it from beginning to end. The Dimension of Lost Things concludes the set as written by Big Finish regular Lisa McMullen. We are back for another very sci-fi story, and I like how the direction of the arc is starting to form within this episode. The middle story, as much as I loved it, didn't really address directly the main plot arc of the series, but I didn't mind that given how bold the story was. The Doctor is still being chased through time by Cosmogon, acting on behalf of the Division, and to escape, the Doctor finds herself in a very bizarre dimension where everything is a bit higgledy-piggledy. When you lose your keys, or your car, or your mental sanity, it ends up in this dimension, apparently. What instantly captured me with this third story is the way that Lisa McMullen has written Jo Martin's Doctor. I found myself chuckling along to her words because Jo's delivery is naturally quite funny. It's straight down to business, stop faffing about. When there is adults around, there is this rather fun harshness which comes out within her Doctor, which wasn't as present within the previous story. And again, it's a very physical episode. Jo Martin has quite a lot to do within this episode, and she sells it superbly on audio. Pressing the buttons on the TARDIS console, the way she talks to the machine TARDIS and the way it's operating, it's all very doctory. Athelia and Sandy Irvin are also great additions to the story. When Sandy gets a little bit overwhelmed at the start of the episode, I love how the Doctor talks him round. While Sandy is human, Athelia is an alien, along with her squirrel friend Bevan. They make for a great adventurous duo. And why there isn't an alien squirrel on the cover art, I've got absolutely no idea. That is an opportunity missed right there. So as I mentioned, this is a very sci-fi visual story. It's very trippy, quite fast-paced as the characters move between different time portals and locations. It's perfect for audio, as you don't need the extreme budgets required to capture this concept on a TV screen, which is rather handy. It's a great example of surreal Doctor Who, but at the same time, I think your mind really needs to be switched on to imagine this concept of the episode. Otherwise, the experience on audio may just descend into a rather unusual blur. Action sequences after action sequences and chase sequences with an aim to get to a specific place, but if you're not following the plot, it won't really have any meaning. Much like episode 2, I like how Lisa ties in the memory loss angle for the Fugitive Doctor into this surreal landscape. All I'll say is there is a reason that Jo Martin is present twice on the cover art. This again helps the series have a little bit of direction, and considering it's episode 3 of the set, hopefully it also provides a little bit of a hook as we travel towards the next volume as well, coming later this year. I like how the unknown memories are displayed within this story. It's really spooky, it unnerves the Fugitive Doctor. They're physically scared of their past and what was physically within it and what happened. And I just hope that this build-up pays off to something quite exciting, but also challenging for this Doctor. One of the important things about this box set overall is that across all 3 episodes, I think that this box set offers something for many different types of Big Finish listener. Those who like sci-fi, those who like fantasy, a little bit of historical thrown in there as well. There is also that rather disorientating sense that you get from this incarnation of the Doctor, a little bit of unpredictability because we don't really know who they are, because she doesn't really know who she is either. Jo absolutely has a presence on audio. Episode 2 Baba Yaga is without a doubt the highlight of the set, and maybe that's because episode 1 and 3 tilt a little bit more so into that spacey sci-fi techno-babble realm, which personally I don't like as much at the minute. I like these more bold stories, but I did enjoy the set overall, and I'm excited to hear what comes next. So there we have it, that is my review of the Fugitive Doctor Adventures Volume 1 Most Wanted. A rather nice listen actually, which I think caters to multiple different types of Doctor Who fan, those just getting into Big Finish, those who have also listened to Big Finish as well in the past. I think there's a nice variety between rather standard fun spacey stories and a little bit out there as well, particularly with Baba Yaga, and I hope that we get to see more of that within the next volume, but also maybe a series which is more tied together with that plot arc directly being addressed. But I think we're definitely at a point with Big Finish now where, unlike, say, the early 10th Doctor adventures, which were incredibly easy stories, I think the Fugitive Doctor range is a great opportunity to push the boat out. It's quite a cinematic box set, a great celebration of the character, and I look forward to hearing more from Jo Martin in the future. So thank you very much for watching this review. I really hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for regular Big Finish audio drama reviews. Have a nice day, and I shall see you all next time.